Hi friends, I'm Mrs. Rasnick and I'm the KB teacher, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of apple science together for our flex time on Wednesday. If you want to do this activity along with me, you can, but you'll need a few materials. So what you'll need is an apple. It can be any type of apple and any size. You'll need a few blocks. I have just some blocks that my son Cooper plays with, but you might have some linking cubes that you use for math. You can use those. I also have a piece of paper and something to write with. And then the last thing I have is a bowl of water. So those are the materials that we're going to be using for today's activity. If you don't have those things at home, that's okay. You can just watch this video and kind of do the activity along with me. At the end, there is also going to be one step that you can do if you want to. But for that step, you're going to need a grown-up to help you. It's not something that kids should be doing on their own. So if you do the optional thing at the end, and I'll remind you when we get there, please make sure that you ask a grown-up for help. You're going to need to use something that only a grown-up should be using. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get our paper ready for science. Today we're going to be doing a few observations. We're going to be using our eyes to look at different things. And we're also going to do a couple of simple experiments where you're going to be making a hypothesis, a guess about what will happen, and then we'll do the experiment and see what actually happens. So lots of fun stuff today. Let's go ahead and start by getting our paper ready. You're going to hold your paper just like me, the tall way, and we're going to do a little bit of folding. So first we're going to fold our paper in half. I think it's the easiest when you do this to try to match the corners together. When they're matched, you kind of want to pinch down the paper, go over it a few times and make a nice crease. Then we'll turn our paper the long way this time, and we're going to fold it one more time. We'll match up those corners, pinch it together, and then go over it a few times. Get a nice crease. When you've done those two things, then you're going to open your paper back up so it's big. And what you should see are 4 boxes. And in each of these 4 boxes, we're going to be doing a different science activity with our apples today. So if you want to, the other thing that you can do, sometimes this helps me just to remember that I'm using these boxes, you can take a marker and you can draw over top of the lines that you just folded to. I'm going to do that on my paper so it helps me a little bit. Our first activity we're going to do in this top box here. We're going to go like this throughout our activities. So our first activity that we're going to do is I just want you to look at your apple. And I want you to observe your apple like a scientist would observe. And what I mean by that is I want you to really notice things about your apple. Things like how big your apple is, if it has a stem on the top, how big or long is the stem, what different kinds of colors do you see on your apple, and maybe even if I can show you my apple a little closer, you might be able to see my apple has different colors, but it also has kind of little spots on it too. Does your apple have spots, or does your apple just have one color? So I want you to take a minute to just observe and think about what your apple looks like and really answer those questions. What color is it? Does it have any patterns on it? How big is your apple? What we're going to do is we're going to draw a picture of exactly how your apple looks. And I want you to try to include all those different things that we talked about. So do your observation of your apple, and then in our first box, you're going to draw a picture of exactly what your apple looks like. For me, I would try to include these 2 colors. Mine is kind of a shorter apple, but it's very wide around. It has a little stem, and it has a few spots. So go ahead and do your picture for your observation now. friends, for our second activity, we're going to be doing a little bit of measurement, and we're going to measure how tall our apple is. And that's why you have some blocks with you. So with your blocks, you're going to start to stack them, even if they're connecting blocks, next to your apple until they're about the same height. And it might not be exact, and that's okay. So I'm going to start stacking mine. I have 1, I have 2. It's still a little higher than 2 for me, so I think I'm going to add another 1. But it's not quite as tall as 3. So I'm going to say it's not exact, but my apple is closer to 2 blocks than it is to 3 blocks. So I'm going to say that my apple is 2 blocks tall. In the second box on your paper today, what you're going to do is you're going to draw a picture of your apple again, and this time you're going to write how many blocks tall is your apple. So go ahead and measure your apple and fill in that part now. Friends, for our third activity, you're going to need your bowl of water. It doesn't need to be as big of a bowl as I have. There's not very much water in my bowl, but you want your water to be a little bit higher than your apple. We're going to do a quick experiment, and we're going to be making a hypothesis, a guess about what we think is going to happen. What we're going to do for the experiment is we're going to be dropping your apple into the water. And we're going to observe or notice if the apple floats or if it sinks. But before you do that, we need to make what's called a hypothesis, which is a guess about what we think is going to happen. So let's go ahead and make our hypothesis now. You're going to copy down the sentence starter that you see at the bottom of the screen. And in your last box, you're either going to write the word float or sink. And I want you to make your guess before you drop your apple in the water. So in that third box on your science paper, you're going to copy down the sentence starter at the bottom of the screen, and then you're going to either write the word float if you think the apple's going to stay on top of the water, or the word sink if you think the apple is going to go to the bottom of the water. Go ahead and make your hypothesis now. All right, friends, now that we've made a hypothesis, now we're going to find out what actually happens. So very carefully, I'm by my computer, so I have to do this super carefully. You're going to drop your apple into your bowl of water, and I want you to notice, to observe, does it go right to the bottom and sink, or does it stay on the top of the water and float? So go ahead and drop your apple in and start to notice. And give it a couple of seconds before you totally decide your answer. So I'm going to kind of talk you through what's happening with my apple, and I can let you peek at it a little bit. I'm noticing that the apple touched the bottom when I first dropped it in. But then it started to rise to the top of the water, and now it's kind of floating. And even when I move it around, it's not touching the bottom of the bowl. It's kind of bobbing up and down in the water. If you've ever been fishing and used a bobber for fishing, that's kind of what I'm noticing with my apple right now. So I will say that the answer to my question is that the apple did float. So if you picked float for your hypothesis, that's awesome. If you didn't, that's okay. Sometimes in science, we don't have the right answer, and that's why we do experiments. So that was just for fun to see if your hypothesis was right or not. All right, friends, for our last and final activity, we're going to make one more hypothesis about our apple. So I'm going to take my apple out and shake off a little bit of the water. If it's wet, no big deal for this last activity. The next thing we're going to make a hypothesis about is what's on the inside of the apple. And what's on the inside of the apple can help us answer the question, why did the apple float? So you might have bitten into an apple before, so you might have a good idea of what's inside of the apple. But I want you to make a guess right now. You're going to copy down the sentence starter at the bottom of the screen again and tell me, what do you think is inside of the apple? And if you know, maybe you can make another hypothesis and guess how many of that object is on the inside of the apple. Go ahead and copy down the sentence starter now and take a guess, a hypothesis about what you think is inside of the apple. All right, friends, so this is the last part of science. This is the part that you're going to need a grown-up for. If you don't have a grown-up with you, that's okay. You can just watch me do it. But if you want to do this part at home, you need a grown-up, okay? I'm going to cut into my apple to show you what's on the inside of the apple. So if you have a grown-up that can help you with this part, really a grown-up should do the whole part. Get your grown-up and you can do it along with me. If not, you can just watch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut into my apple, and I want to cut all the way to the center where the stem is, which can be a little bit tricky. If you have a special apple cutter at your house, that makes it a little bit easier. Otherwise, you can just use a regular knife. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut straight through the middle of the apple. So you can see exactly what's on the inside. And now I can show you zoomed up. So if you guessed, if your hypothesis was there was seeds on the inside, you got the answer correct. You might have also guessed how many seeds. You could keep cutting if you wanted to figure out that part. But what I want you to notice about the seeds is inside the apple, these seeds are in little compartments and they're not totally full. So there's seeds here, but there's also something else that helps the apples float in the water. And what it is air. So that little bit of air that's trapped inside these seed spaces helps the apple float to the top of the water when we drop it in. And one thing this makes me think of is when I was a kid and I went swimming, I used to blow up some things, some swimmies we called them at my house, that went around my arms. They were filled with air, and that helped my body stay at the top of the water. So that's exactly what's happening with this apple. Around these little seeds is just a little bit of air that's helping it bob to the top of the water and float. And that's why apples don't sink when we drop them in. I thought that was kind of a fun fact to share. All right, friends, this is the end of science. If you cut open your apple like me, you're going to want to eat it quickly so it doesn't get brown. I hope you had fun with this activity, and I'm excited to do some more science with you in the future.